London in the spring of 1815 hung heavy with fog that clung to windows like ghostly fingers, an apt reflection of Lady Evangeline Crawford's increasingly dim prospects. She stood before the looking-glass in her bedchamber, critically assessing the woman who gazed back at her, a woman of 23, whose intelligence sparkled in grey eyes that had seen too much disappointment for their relatively few years. Her chestnut hair had been arranged simply by her maid, adorned with her mother's last remaining pearl pins, while her gown of faded blue silk had been cleverly remade for the third season, its modest neckline and sleeves reflecting both propriety and their reduced circumstances. Another ball. Another evening of standing along the wall while younger, prettier, wealthier debutantes fluttered and preened before eligible gentlemen. At 23, Evangeline was already considered firmly on the shelf, a fact that might have troubled her less had her father's gambling debts not made a suitable match, her only hope of security. Lord Crawford had lost everything but their modest townhouse on the unfashionable edge of Mayfair, and even that final sanctuary hung by the thinnest of threads. Evangeline sighed, pinching colour into pale cheeks as voices drifted up from her father's study below, male voices speaking in tones too urgent to bode well. Gathering her skirts, she moved silently to the landing, where the ancient floorboards had long ago revealed their secrets to her careful steps. The first voice belonged to her father, slurred and desperate as it had become these past years. The second voice, however, sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, deep and commanding with the unmistakable authority of power and privilege. The Duke of Blackwood, Sebastian Montgomery, a man whose name was whispered in London drawing-rooms with equal parts, fascination and dread. Known as the Dark Duke, he had returned from the war with half his face scarred, retreating to his vast country estate and emerging only rarely to attend to business matters. Why such a man would be in their modest home at this hour defied explanation, until her father's next words clarified everything with horrifying precision. "The sum is considerable, Your Grace, but surely we might arrange more favourable terms." There was a pause, then the Duke's voice, cold as a winter's night. "The terms are precisely as stated, Crawford. I have purchased all your debts. Your creditors answer to me now, and the only terms I will accept involve your daughter." Evangeline pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp as her father stammered something inaudible. The Duke's response came with chilling finality. "Lady Evangeline has caught my interest. Whether that serves to your advantage or complete ruination depends entirely on your cooperation. I will expect an answer within the fortnight." The sound of retreating footsteps and the front door closing signaled the Duke's departure, leaving Evangeline frozen on the landing, her heart thundering against her ribs as the terrible truth dawned. The most feared man in London had purchased her father's debts and mentioned her by name. She was, it seemed, already caught in an invisible snare, though she had yet to understand why the notorious Duke of Blackwood had set his sights on her of all people. The Pemberton ballroom blazed with light from a dozen crystal chandeliers, their countless candles casting a golden glow over the sea of silks, satins, and jewels below, as London society paraded its wealth and connections with practiced ostentation. Lady Evangeline Crawford stood along the wall, her faded blue silk gown painfully modest among the frothy confections of lace and ribbon adorning the younger debutantes who twirled across the polished floor. From her vantage point, she observed the familiar pageant with detached interest, noting how Lady Pemberton's 17-year-old daughter simpered at the compliments of Lord Westley, while her mother watched with barely concealed calculation. The marriage market operated with all the subtlety of a cattle auction, though with considerably more champagne and considerably less honesty about the merchandise on offer. Evangeline sipped her lukewarm punch, counting the minutes until she and her father might reasonably depart without causing offence, when a familiar figure appeared at her side. Thomas Harrington, her childhood friend and the second son of Viscount Merryweather, bowed with exaggerated formality before leaning against the wall beside her, his expression uncharacteristically grave. He had been abroad these past months, serving as secretary to the British ambassador in Vienna, and his unexpected appearance tonight momentarily brightened her spirits until she noted the concern in his usually merry blue eyes. Without preamble, He informed her that London hummed with the most shocking rumour concerning her father, and none other than the Duke of Blackwood. The tongue whispered that Lord Crawford had promised her hand in marriage to the reclusive nobleman to settle his substantial gambling debts, a prospect so alarming that Evangeline nearly dropped her punch cup. The Dark Duke, as society had dubbed him, had returned from the Peninsular War with half his face devastated by burns, a physical manifestation of the darkness rumoured to lurk within his soul. He had retreated to his vast country estate of Blackwood Manor, emerging only to attend to business matters and reportedly terrifying those unfortunate enough to encounter him. Some claimed he had killed men in duels over minor slights, while others whispered of occult practices conducted in the east wing of his ancestral home. Thomas watched her face carefully as he relayed these tales, adding in a low voice that the Duke was said to be obscenely wealthy but utterly ruthless in business and personal matters alike. Evangeline maintained her composure through years of practiced dignity, though her mind raced with the implications of what Thomas revealed. The mysterious conversation she had overheard suddenly made terrible sense, the Duke's interest in her, not a passing fancy, but a calculated acquisition. She was, it seemed, to be purchased like one of his estates, a transaction between men of property with her consent, neither sought nor required. The very thought sent ice through her veins, even as the overheated ballroom swirled with laughing couples oblivious to her distress, the music continuing its cheerful melody, while Evangeline contemplated a future, chained to a scarred, bitter man who collected debts and apparently unwilling brides. The modest townhouse on Wimpole Street seemed to shrink further as rain lashed against its windows, mirroring the storm brewing within its faded walls, as Evangeline confronted her father in his study. Lord Crawford sat slumped behind his desk, a decanter of brandy half emptied beside scattered papers bearing red wax seals and threatening inscriptions. His once handsome face had grown haggard, the legacy of grief and gambling etched into premature lines as he avoided his daughter's steady gaze. The rumours could not be true, Evangeline insisted, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain composed. She would not be bartered away like chattel to settle his debts, particularly not to a man whose reputation chilled even the hardiest souls in London. Her father flinched at her accusations, running shaking fingers through silver-streaked hair as he attempted to explain what had transpired with the Duke of Blackwood. Yes, the Duke had indeed purchased all their outstanding debts, consolidating power over their financial future in his singular grasp. But no, there had been no explicit arrangement regarding marriage, merely an interest expressed in Lady Evangeline that remained frustratingly vague. "He wants something from us, from you specifically," Lord Crawford admitted, his bloodshot eyes finally meeting hers with a mixture of shame and bewilderment, "but he has not stated his terms. Clearly beyond requiring your presence at Blackwood Manor for a matter he claims concerns your mother." At the mention of her long-deceased mother, Evangeline felt her indignation falter momentarily, confusion replacing righteous anger. What possible connection could exist between her gentle mother, gone these 12 years, and the fearsome Duke of Blackwood? Her father offered no answers, only the devastating revelation that their time had run shorter than she realized. The Duke had granted them a single week before foreclosing on their home, the final refuge they had managed to retain through years of diminishing circumstances. After that, they would face the horrors of debtor's prison, a fate her father had thus far avoided through increasingly desperate measures. Evangeline paced the threadbare carpet, her mind racing through options that dissolved like sugar in tea the moment she examined them closely. They had no relatives wealthy enough to assist them, no possessions valuable enough to sell, and her modest skills as a governess or companion would not earn enough to address debts of such magnitude. Her father watched her with the hollow eyes of a man who had gambled away not only his own future, but his daughter's as well, leaving them at the mercy of a man whose motives remained as shadowed as his scarred face. The study seemed to close in around them, the walls whispering of imminent loss while the rain continued its relentless assault, each drop another second ticking away toward their inevitable ruin. Within this suffocating atmosphere of impending calamity, Evangeline felt something harden within her chest, a determination born of desperation, and the bitter knowledge that she alone must find a path through this darkness her father had created, whatever sinister intentions the Duke of Blackwood might harbour toward her, or the memory of her mother. The next 3 days found Evangeline sequestered in her father's study, sifting through mountains of correspondence, financial documents, and personal papers with the desperate energy of a drowning woman seeking any fragment that might float. Lord Crawford had taken to his bed with a convenient headache born more of brandy than genuine affliction, leaving her to untangle the web of their precarious situation alone. The connections between her father and the Duke of Blackwood remained frustratingly obscure until she discovered, buried beneath a stack of unpaid bills, a bundle of yellowed letters exchanged between her mother and a woman named Lady Eleanor Montgomery, who Evangeline realized with a start must be the Duke's mother. The correspondence hinted at a friendship formed during their shared seasons and maintained until her mother's untimely death, though the precise nature of their connection remained tantalizingly vague. More pressing still were the documents detailing the extent of their debt to the Duke, sums so astronomical that Evangeline felt physically ill contemplating them. It was while searching for additional information about Blackwood Manor itself that she uncovered the most intriguing document of all, tucked inside an ancient atlas of notable English estates. A faded parchment map of Blackwood Manor revealed not only the expected layout of the grand house, but also, marked in faint ink, nearly invisible to the casual observer, a hidden passage leading from the East Wing library to what appeared to be an underground chamber. Scrawled in the margin in her father's unmistakable handwriting were the words Blackwood Vault, rumoured repository of family treasure. Evangeline sat back in her father's chair, heart racing as possibilities crystallized in her mind. If such a treasure existed, if she could somehow gain access to Blackwood Manor and locate this vault, perhaps she might find something valuable enough to negotiate their freedom from the Duke's control. The plan took shape with surprising clarity as night fell outside the study windows, bold and desperate, but not without merit. She would accept the Duke's summons to Blackwood Manor, presenting herself as the dutiful daughter willing to discuss whatever connection he claimed to her mother. Once there, she would use the map to locate the hidden passage and discover what secrets the Blackwood Vault contained, be it gold, jewels, or documents valuable enough to serve as leverage. The very audacity of the scheme sent a thrill of something like excitement through her veins, so different from the dull resignation that had become her constant companion these past years. By midnight, Evangeline had committed the map to memory, burned the original to prevent discovery, and begun composing a carefully worded letter to the Duke, accepting his invitation to Blackwood Manor at his earliest convenience. The Evangeline Crawford who had stood meekly against ballroom walls watching life pass by was transforming into someone bolder, someone willing to take extraordinary risks to secure her future rather than passively awaiting whatever fate men decided for her, even if that transformation led her directly into the lair of the man London called the Dark Duke. The journey to Blackwood Estate took Evangeline through increasingly wild countryside, the neat hedgerows and cultivated fields of southern England gradually surrendering to ancient forests and mist-shrouded moors as the hired carriage laboured over rutted roads rarely travelled. By the time the imposing silhouette of Blackwood Manor appeared on the horizon late in the afternoon of the second day, Evangeline had begun to understand why local villages spoke of the estate in hushed, superstitious tones. The massive structure loomed against the darkening sky like something from a Gothic novel, all towering spires, blackened stone, and rows of windows that reflected the fading light like unseeing eyes. The gardens through which the carriage now passed had clearly once been magnificent, but years of neglect had transformed them into a half-wild maze where marble statues peered through overgrown roses and fountain nymphs drowsed beneath blankets of climbing ivy. Gargoyles leered from the roofline, their grotesque stone faces contorted in silent screams or mocking laughter as they had for centuries, bearing witness to generations of Blackwood secrets. When the carriage finally crunched to a halt before the grand entrance, Evangeline steeled herself for the performance upon which her desperate plan depended. She had written ahead announcing herself not as Lady Evangeline Crawford, but as Miss Evangeline Smith, paid companion to the Duke's elderly cousin, Lady Elizabeth Montgomery, who had requested a visit to her family home before her health failed completely. The fiction was carefully constructed around fragments of truth gleaned from her mother's letters, gambling on the likelihood that the Duke, who had spent years abroad and in seclusion, might not be fully acquainted with his extended family connections. An ancient butler admitted her with the stiff formality of one unaccustomed to visitors, his rheumy eyes betraying no suspicion as he informed her that Lady Elizabeth would be shown to her chambers when she arrived, and that his Grace was indeed in residence, but rarely received guests. The vast entrance hall through which she followed him spoke eloquently of faded grandeur, its marble floors dulled by time, its tapestries heavy with dust, and its furnishings shrouded in holland covers like patient ghosts. The handful of servants she glimpsed moved silently through shadows, their expressions as closed as the numerous doors they passed. Evangeline noted each landmark against her memorized map: the grand staircase, the portrait gallery, the east wing corridor that would lead eventually to the library concealing the hidden passage she sought. The air held the musty scent of disuse mingled with beeswax and something else, something indefinably masculine and alive that suggested the presence of the manor house's notorious master. As the butler left her in a surprisingly comfortable bedchamber, Evangeline allowed herself a moment of trembling reaction before straightening her spine and unpacking the few belongings she had brought for her charade. She had successfully infiltrated Blackwood Manor, but the most dangerous part of her plan still lay ahead, requiring her to navigate this labyrinthine house, locate the vault, and avoid discovery by the one man in England who might recognize her true purpose, the mysterious Duke himself. For 3 days, Evangeline employed her role as a lattice companion to explore the vast, labyrinthine corridors of Blackwood Manor, explaining her wanderings as attempts to familiarize herself with the house before Lady Elizabeth's arrival, a fiction that grew increasingly tenuous with each passing hour. The ancient butler, Mr. Winters, had informed her that his Grace rarely emerged from his study before dusk, allowing her relative freedom during daylight hours to compare the actual layout of the manor to her memorized map. Each morning she ventured a little further, carefully noting locked doors, unused wings, and potential paths to the library that concealed the entrance to the hidden passage. The few servants she encountered seemed surprised by her presence, but not suspicious, their isolation having rendered them hungry for fresh conversation and gossip from London. From the housekeeper, Mrs. Parker, she learned that the Duke kept strictly nocturnal habits, working through the night and sleeping well past noon. The young maid who brought her tea whispered that no female guests had been received at Blackwood Manor since the Duke's return from war, his scarred face and bitter temperament having transformed him from the handsome, charming young man who had once set hearts aflutter throughout the county. Most intriguingly, the elderly gardener confided that his Grace spent hours in the old library, searching through family records and ancient texts, as if seeking something of great importance. The manor itself seemed to breathe around her, centuries of history and secrets pulsing through its stone walls. Certain corridors felt suddenly cold without apparent cause, while others held the lingering scent of tobacco and sandalwood that suggested the Duke's recent passage. Covered portraits lined the gallery, draped in black cloth as if in perpetual mourning, while locked rooms beckoned with mysterious purpose. By the 3rd day, Evangeline had successfully located the East Wing library mentioned in her father's map, a magnificent 2-story chamber, lined with thousands of volumes and dominated by an enormous stone fireplace, bearing the Blackwood coat of arms, a raven clutching a burning branch. According to the map, the entrance to the hidden passage lay behind a particular bookcase, triggered by some mechanism she had yet to identify. As twilight approached on that 3rd evening, Evangeline reluctantly retreated to her chambers, knowing the Duke would soon be abroad in the house, and unwilling to risk a premature encounter before her plans were complete. She sat at the small writing desk in her room, recording her observations and plotting her next steps when a soft knock at her door announced the arrival of Mrs. Parker with an unexpected message. "His Grace requests the pleasure of your company for dinner this evening, Miss Smith," the housekeeper announced with evident surprise. "He awaits you in the small dining room at 8 o'clock. Evangeline felt her heart stutter in her chest, the moment she had simultaneously dreaded and required now upon her, the necessity of facing the dark Duke himself while maintaining her precarious disguise. knowing that one wrong word might unravel her desperate scheme and seal her fate. The midnight hour found Evangeline moving like a wraith through the darkened corridors of Blackwood Manor, her single candle casting long, dancing shadows across ancient tapestries and gleaming suits of armor that seemed to watch her passage with hollow, judging eyes. Her dinner with the Duke earlier that evening had been a tense affair of carefully measured words, his piercing gaze studying her with an intensity that suggested he found her story lacking, though he had said nothing to indicate suspicion. Now, with the household asleep and even the most nocturnal master presumably retired, she seized her opportunity to locate the hidden passage revealed in her father's map. The east wing lay in profound silence, broken only by the occasional creak of settling timbers and the soft whisper of her skirts against the carpet as she counted doorways and noted landmarks. The key she had carefully purloined from the housekeeper's ring earlier that day felt cold and heavy in her palm, a tangible reminder of lines crossed and risks taken that the desperate Evangeline of a week ago would never have contemplated. At last, she reached the oak-panelled door that, according to her calculations, should lead to an antechamber connecting to the library and the hidden passage beyond. Heart thundering in her chest, she inserted the stolen key, wincing at the metallic scrape as the ancient lock reluctantly yielded to her touch. The door swung inward on surprisingly silent hinges, revealing not the expected antechamber but a spacious bedchamber, bathed in silvery moonlight streaming through tall, uncurtained windows. Before Evangeline could retreat, her gaze fell upon a tall figure standing motionless by the largest window, his broad shoulders and commanding posture instantly recognizable, even before he turned toward the unexpected intrusion. The Duke of Blackwood faced her fully, moonlight casting half his features in stark relief, while shadow mercifully concealed the scarred side that London gossips described in such horrific detail. In that frozen moment of mutual shock, Evangeline noted absurdly that even with his rumored disfigurement, Sebastian Montgomery possessed a raw masculine beauty in his strong jaw, penetrating eyes, and the proud carriage of his head. Her candle flickered wildly, reflecting the trembling of her hand as the Duke's expression transformed from surprise to something altogether more dangerous, his voice when it came low and controlled, yet vibrating with barely restrained emotion. "What are you doing here, Miss Smith? Or should I address you properly as Lady Evangeline Crawford?" The use of her true name shattered any hope of maintaining her deception, the careful fiction she had constructed collapsing like a house of cards as the Duke moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator cornering its prey. Her mind raced desperately for explanations, excuses, anything to justify her presence in his private chambers at midnight, but found only the damning truth that she had come to Blackwood Manor under false pretenses with the explicit intention of locating and exploiting whatever secrets the family vault contained. The Duke of Blackwood moved with astonishing speed for so large a man, crossing the moonlit chamber to close and lock the door before Evangeline could gather her scattered wits enough to flee. The decisive click of the key turning in the lock echoed with dreadful finality in the silence between them, sealing her fate as surely as a judge's gavel. "Lady Evangeline Crawford," the Duke said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle despite the gravity of the situation, "how very interesting to find you prowling my bedchamber at midnight, when you were supposedly the companion to a non-existent relative." His face remained half-shadowed as he circled her slowly, his movements controlled yet fluid, like a great cat assessing a particularly puzzling prey. Evangeline raised her chin, summoning dignity from some hidden reserve as her mind raced through increasingly desperate options, each more implausible than the last until truth alone remained, stark and damning yet oddly liberating. With surprising steadiness, she confessed everything: the overheard conversation, her father's mounting debts, the discovery of the old map showing a hidden passage supposedly leading to the Blackwood vault, and her desperate plan to find something valuable enough to bargain for their freedom from his control. Throughout her halting explanation, the Duke remained unnervingly silent, his expression unreadable, until she finished with a soft plea that he understand the desperation that had driven her to such extremes. A long moment passed before he responded, moving to light several candles that gradually pushed back the concealing shadows. revealing his face fully for the first time. The scarring was indeed present along the left side, a pattern of healed burns that pulled slightly at his eye and corner of his mouth, yet far less monstrous than London gossip had painted. More shocking was the unexpected amusement that brightened his gaze as he regarded her with what appeared to be reluctant admiration. "So, Lady Evangeline," he said, "you would rather become a thief than my wife?" The blunt statement struck her like a physical blow, confirming her worst suspicions while simultaneously raising questions that scattered her thoughts like autumn leaves in a gale. He had indeed intended marriage, yet seemed more intrigued than angered by her attempted burglary, as if her desperate scheme had revealed something about her character that he found unexpectedly compelling. The tension between them shifted, transforming from the fear of discovery to something more complex and infinitely more dangerous, charged with unspoken possibilities, and the sudden, disorienting awareness that the man before her bore little resemblance to the monster of her imagination. Sebastian Montgomery, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, studied her with eyes that seemed to peel away pretense and propriety alike, leaving Evangeline feeling curiously exposed yet paradoxically safer than she had felt in years, even as she stood locked in the bedchamber of the most feared man in England, caught in an act that could see her transported or worse. "Now you must marry me," the Duke stated, his words falling into the candlelit room, not as a threat but with the calm certainty of a man proposing the most logical solution to their shared predicament. He gestured toward the locked door behind her, explaining that her presence in his bedchamber at this hour, regardless of her intentions, had created a situation from which only marriage could salvage her reputation should it become known. Evangeline felt indignation rise like a tide within her chest, washing away caution and propriety alike as she responded with unexpected fire. "I would rather go to debtor's prison than enter a marriage of convenience with a man who purchases brides through their father's gambling debts," she declared. Her chin lifted in defiance despite the precariousness of her position. To her astonishment, the Duke threw back his head and laughed, a rich, genuine sound utterly at odds with his fearsome reputation. The sound transformed his features, softening the hard angles of his jaw and bringing warmth to eyes that now regarded her with undisguised appreciation rather than judgment. He moved about the room, lighting additional candles, gradually revealing himself as a man entirely different from the monster London society had painted. In the growing light, Evangeline saw intelligence in his gaze, wry humor in the quirk of his mouth, and scars that, while certainly present along the left side of his face, were far less horrific than rumor had suggested, merely the mark of a man who had faced fire and survived. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new note of respect mingled with something that might have been hope. "You have spirit, Lady Evangeline, and honesty as well. Qualities I find vastly more appealing than the simpering deference most ladies offer in pursuit of my title and fortune." He moved closer, close enough that she could detect the scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to his skin, yet maintaining sufficient distance to avoid impropriety despite the intimacy of their surroundings. "I offer you a bargain instead," he said. "1 month at Blackwood Manor as my guest, properly chaperoned and with all propriety observed. Give me that time to prove that a marriage between us could be based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, rather than mere financial convenience. If at the end of that period you still find the prospect of becoming my wife so abhorrent, I shall forgive your father's debts entirely and return to London with no stain upon your reputation." The proposition hung in the air between them, unexpected and bewildering in its generosity, yet fraught with implications that sent Evangeline's pulse racing. 1 month to discover the man behind the fearsome Duke of Blackwood, 1 month to determine whether Sebastian Montgomery might be someone she could respect, perhaps even care for, rather than the cold-hearted nobleman who had purchased her father's debts with calculated precision. Dawn crept through the uncurtained windows of the Duke's bedchamber, painting the room in soft rose and gold that seemed at odds with the extraordinary conversation that had continued through the night as Evangeline and Sebastian Montgomery negotiated the terms of their unusual arrangement. They had moved from his bedchamber to a small adjoining sitting room hours ago, the door left pointedly ajar for propriety despite the damage already done to her reputation. The Duke explained with remarkable candor that young Thomas, a footman who had been with the household since boyhood, had observed her entering the Duke's private chambers, a fact that could not be undone regardless of her intentions or the outcome of their discussion. Her reputation, already compromised by this nocturnal visit, could only be salvaged through either immediate marriage or a plausible alternative explanation that the servants might accept without question. Sebastian proposed that they announce a formal courtship, explaining her presence in his rooms as a late-night discussion regarding her father's debts, a conversation that had naturally led to a more personal connection between them. His voice remained steady as he outlined how the month ahead would proceed, with Evangeline staying at Blackwood Manor as an honored guest while they became better acquainted under the watchful eyes of his household staff and the elderly aunt he would summon to serve as proper chaperone. Throughout his explanation, Evangeline noted the careful consideration in his plans, the respect with which he addressed her concerns, and the absence of the cold calculation she had expected from the man who had purchased her father's debts. When she questioned why he would offer such generous terms rather than simply demanding her compliance, Sebastian turned fully toward the window, allowing the dawn light to illuminate the scarred side of his face without concealment or shame. He explained quietly that he needed a wife who saw beyond his physical appearance, a woman of intelligence and spirit who might come to care for the man rather than merely tolerate his title and fortune. She had proven herself both resourceful and brave in her attempt to save her father, qualities he admired far more than the artificial accomplishments valued in London ballrooms. The genuine vulnerability in his admission touched something unexpected in Evangeline's heart, softening her resistance, even as practicality forced her to recognize that his offer represented her only viable path forward. With the morning light strengthening around them, she reluctantly agreed to his proposal of a month-long courtship, maintaining the right to refuse his hand at the end of that time with no financial penalty to her father. As Sebastian formally opened the sitting-room door to escort her back to her own chambers, Evangeline felt strangely light-headed. Uncertain whether from exhaustion after the long night or the disorienting sensation of having discovered a man of honor and complexity where she had expected to find only a monstrous creditor. The Duke of Blackwood, it seemed, might be as different from his fearsome reputation as Blackwood Manor itself was from the cold, soulless fortress of her imagination. News of the engagement between Lady Evangeline Crawford and Sebastian Montgomery, Duke of Blackwood, spread through London with the swift inevitability of scandal, carried on whispers from drawing-room to ballroom until it seemed the entire ton spoke of nothing else. The circumstances proved simply too delicious for society to resist, the impoverished spinster somehow securing the kingdom's most eligible yet reclusive bachelor, a man whose fortune was exceeded only by his fearsome reputation and mysterious scars. 2 weeks after their extraordinary agreement, Evangeline found herself standing beside Sebastian at Lady Harrington's dinner party, the Duke's first appearance in London society since his return from war years earlier. His presence had caused a sensation, conversations faltering and resuming in hushed tones as they entered the ornate drawing-room together, his hand placed protectively at the small of her back. She wore a new gown of emerald silk, a gift from Sebastian that complemented her chestnut hair and fair complexion, while subtly announcing his claim upon her through its obvious quality and fashionable cut. Despite the outward confidence she projected, Evangeline felt each speculative glance like a physical blow as ladies whispered behind fans and gentlemen assessed her with new interest. Lady Pembroke, always reliable for indiscreet observations, remarked loudly that some women would go to extraordinary lengths to secure a wealthy husband, even if it meant compromising themselves with a man whose face would frighten children. From another corner came whispered theories about her mysterious visit to Blackwood Manor, suggestions that she had deliberately entrapped the Duke in some scandalous situation to force his hand, while others speculated that only financial desperation could drive a woman to marry a man so disfigured, no matter how substantial his fortune. Most discomforting were the reactions of gentlemen who had previously overlooked her at countless social events, their dismissal now transformed to calculating assessment as they re-evaluated the woman who had somehow captured the interest of one of England's most powerful men. Thomas Harrington alone greeted her with genuine warmth, though concern shadowed his eyes as he studied the tall figure, who remained steadfastly at her side throughout the evening. Sebastian endured the scrutiny with rigid dignity, his expression betraying nothing as curious gazes lingered on his scarred face, though Evangeline noted the tension in his shoulders and the tightening of his jaw when particularly cruel whispers reached their ears. During dinner, seated beside her as protocol demanded of an engaged couple, he leaned slightly closer when Lady Westmoreland made a particularly cutting remark about fortune hunters with ingenious methods. "Their opinions matter little," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I have lived with worse." The quiet solidarity in his voice, the shared acknowledgement that they faced this gauntlet of speculation together, sparked an unexpected warmth in Evangeline's chest, a sensation dangerously close to gratitude for the man society believed she had trapped into marriage. By the evening's end, as their carriage rolled away from Lady Harrington's townhouse, Evangeline found herself wondering if perhaps the true Sebastian Montgomery might indeed prove as different from his reputation as their unusual courtship was from the conventional path she had once expected her life to follow. The return to Blackwood Manor after London's scrutiny felt surprisingly like sanctuary to Evangeline, the ancient stones and quiet corridors offering respite from society's cruel speculation. Under the watchful but discreet eye of the Duke's elderly aunt, Lady Margaret Montgomery, who had arrived to serve as chaperone, Sebastian began sharing the private world he had created within his ancestral home. Each day revealed new facets of the man behind the fearsome reputation, beginning with his magnificent library that extended far beyond the chamber she had sought that fateful night. The two-story room housed not only centuries of family records, but collections of scientific treatises, philosophical works, and correspondence with leading minds across Europe. Sebastian showed her his experimental gardens, where he cultivated rare medicinal plants, explaining complex botanical principles with passionate enthusiasm that transformed his usually reserved demeanor. In his private study, he revealed extensive documentation of agricultural improvements implemented across his vast estates, innovations that had substantially improved the lives of his tenants while increasing productivity through scientific methods rather than increased labor. Most surprising were his detailed sketches for mechanical devices intended to reduce the physical burden on workers, revealing an inventive mind concerned with practical applications of knowledge rather than mere academic pursuit. It was during one such tour of his workshops that Evangeline finally gathered courage to ask about his scars, the visible marks that London society had mythologized into evidence of monstrous character. Sebastian stilled, his hand pausing over a half-constructed irrigation model before explaining quietly that his injuries came not from war as commonly believed, but from rescuing several children trapped in a burning orphanage near his London residence 3 years earlier. He had kept the truth private, allowing the war narrative to persist rather than invite unwanted attention to his act of courage, a revelation that forced Evangeline to fundamentally reconsider everything she had assumed about his character. Later that evening, as they walked through the portrait gallery where generations of Blackwood ancestors gazed from ornate frames, Evangeline asked the question that had lingered since their unusual agreement began: why he had chosen her specifically when any number of younger, more beautiful women would eagerly accept his proposal despite his scars. Sebastian considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness before explaining that he had observed her at social events for months before approaching her father. While other young ladies performed for attention, simpering and flirting without substance, she had watched and listened with genuine curiosity and intelligence, qualities he found far more compelling than conventional beauty, though she possessed that as well in her own quiet way. His assessment, delivered with matter-of-fact appreciation rather than flattery, stirred something unexpected in Evangeline's heart, the novel sensation of being truly seen and valued for aspects of herself she had long believed society considered irrelevant in a woman. The glass greenhouse adjoining the east wing of Blackwood Manor revealed yet another unexpected dimension of Sebastian Montgomery's private world, a cathedral of light and greenery housing botanical treasures gathered from across the globe. Sunlight filtered through hundreds of glass panes, creating a warm, verdant sanctuary where exotic flowers bloomed in riotous color and the air hung heavy with the mingled scents of jasmine, citrus, and rich earth. Sebastian moved through this domain with evident passion, introducing each specimen with the precision of a natural philosopher and the reverence of a poet. When they paused before a collection of unassuming plants with small white flowers, Evangeline surprised him by identifying not only the plant as valerian, but also detailing its properties for treating sleeplessness and nervous disorders. Her mother, she explained, had maintained a modest herb garden and taught her the medicinal uses of various plants, knowledge Evangeline had expanded through her own reading in her father's library. As she continued, identifying digitalis and discussing its carefully measured use for heart ailments, Sebastian's expression transformed with genuine delight, the reserved aristocrat, giving way to an enthusiastic scholar finding unexpected kinship. "Everyone else sees the Duke of Blackwood and his fortune," he observed with quiet wonder as they paused beside a rare orchid imported from the Americas. "But you see the plants themselves." The simple statement, delivered without artifice or flattery, touched Evangeline more deeply than elaborate compliments from a dozen conventional suitors. That evening, after dining with Lady Margaret, who tactfully retired early citing fatigue from her journey, Sebastian and Evangeline remained in the small drawing room where a fire warded off the spring chill. Their conversation, initially focused on botanical texts, gradually expanded to encompass favorite authors, philosophical ideas, and eventually the personal disappointments that had shaped them both. Sebastian spoke of his isolation after returning from the orphanage fire, how society had recoiled from his scars and whispered about his reclusion until he withdrew completely, finding companionship in books and correspondence rather than ballrooms. In turn, Evangeline confessed the quiet desperation of watching youth and prospects slip away while maintaining the facade of contentment expected of an unmarried woman of good family, the silent invisibility that descended as she passed from debutante to spinster in society's cruel accounting. Their shared understanding of disappointment created a bridge between them, an intellectual connection neither had experienced before. As midnight approached and propriety demanded they part, Evangeline realized with startling clarity that for the first time in her life, she had engaged in conversation with a man who valued her mind as much as any physical attribute, who listened to her opinions with genuine interest rather than polite forbearance. The Sebastian Montgomery revealed in those hours bore no resemblance to the fearsome Duke of Blackwood, yet seemed more substantial, more real, than the phantom that had haunted London's imagination. As they bid each other good night at the drawing-room door, their hands touched briefly, a contact more meaningful in its restraint than any passionate declaration could have been at this delicate juncture in their unusual courtship. The truth behind Sebastian's interest in Evangeline emerged unexpectedly one afternoon as she explored the rarely used west wing of Blackwood Manor. In a small study filled with stacks of yellowing documents, she discovered dozens of journals, letters, and official correspondence, all relating to a single event, the trial for treason of the 6th Duke of Blackwood, Sebastian's grandfather, during the Napoleonic Wars. Page after page detailed Sebastian's methodical search for a missing document, rumored to prove his grandfather had been acting as a double agent with the full knowledge of the crown, his apparent treason actually a carefully orchestrated deception to feed false information to the French. The evidence had supposedly been sealed in a secret compartment, somewhere within Blackwood Manor, its location lost after the 6th Duke's sudden death before his name could be cleared. With growing astonishment, Evangeline realized the map she had discovered in her father's study, the treasure vault she had sought to plunder, had nothing to do with gold or jewels, but this precious document that might restore the Blackwood family honor. When Sebastian found her amidst the papers, his initial alarm gave way to reluctant candor as he confirmed her suspicions. The Blackwood name had never recovered from the taint of treason despite his grandfather's posthumous pardon, the whispers following their family through generations and contributing to society's eagerness to believe the worst of the current Duke. Sebastian's isolation had been as much a conscious choice to focus on clearing his grandfather's name as a reaction to society's cruelty regarding his scars. The most disturbing revelation came when Sebastian admitted Lord Crawford had approached him months earlier, claiming knowledge of the lost document and offering assistance in exchange for financial consideration. The connection between their families had been deliberately orchestrated by her father, who had likely planted the map knowing Evangeline would discover it and seek out Blackwood Manor. The realization that she had been manipulated, not only by her father, but potentially by Sebastian himself, sent Evangeline reeling with confusion and betrayal. When she demanded to know if his interest in her had been merely a calculated extension of his obsession with family honor, Sebastian responded with unexpected rawness. He had indeed purchased her father's debts as a means to establish a connection, but not to trap her in marriage. He had watched her for months at social events, intrigued by her intelligence and quiet dignity, seeking a way to meet her properly outside the artificial constraints of ballrooms where his scars and title overwhelmed any possibility of genuine interaction. The map, the debts, the midnight encounter in his bedchamber, all had been threads in a tapestry woven by circumstance and deliberate design, leaving Evangeline uncertain whether she had been the victim of elaborate manipulation or the beneficiary of unconventional fate. As she left Sebastian standing amidst the evidence of his family's past disgrace and his own complex motives, Evangeline felt the foundation of their growing connection tremble beneath the weight of these revelations, even as a part of her acknowledged the compelling honesty with which he had finally shared his true purpose. The search for the hidden document transformed their tentative connection into something deeper as Sebastian and Evangeline spent long hours in various chambers of Blackwood Manor consulting architectural plans, family histories, and the fragments of her memorized map. Their shared purpose created a natural intimacy as they worked side by side in the library, shoulders occasionally brushing as they leaned over the same text, fingers accidentally touching as they reached for the same volume. 3 weeks into their arrangement, a violent spring storm descended upon the estate, rain lashing against the library windows with such fury that Sebastian ordered additional candles and logs for the fire, deeming it unsafe for Evangeline to return to her chambers through the darkened corridors. As lightning illuminated the room in stark white flashes, followed by rumbling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ancient house, Sebastian gradually revealed pieces of himself he had shared with no other. By firelight, his voice low and measured, he spoke of a childhood marked by isolation, a boy who inherited a title at 12, only to discover it came with crushing responsibility and the weight of a legacy tarnished by whispers of treason. The flame light softened his features, dancing across the scarred side of his face that he no longer tried to conceal from her, and Evangeline felt something shift within her chest as she recognized the profound loneliness they shared, despite their different circumstances. Without planning or considering the propriety, she reached across the small space between them and gently touched his scarred cheek, her fingers tracing the uneven texture with a tenderness that surprised them both. Sebastian froze beneath her touch, his eyes widening with vulnerability and wariness intermingled. "Don't offer comfort you don't mean," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion and doubt born of years facing revulsion or pity. Evangeline moved closer, her heart racing beneath her ribs as she responded softly that perhaps it wasn't comfort she was offering, but something else entirely, something neither had anticipated when their arrangement began. The tension between them shifted, transformed into a current of awareness that seemed to electrify the air like the lightning beyond the windows. When Sebastian finally closed the remaining distance between them, his lips meeting hers with hesitant question, Evangeline answered by leaning into the kiss, her hands rising to frame his face without hesitation or distinction between scarred and unscarred skin. The connection was gentle yet profound, tender yet transformative, a first kiss unlike anything Evangeline had imagined during her years of social invisibility or Sebastian had believed possible after his disfigurement. As they slowly drew apart, the storm continued its assault on Blackwood Manor, yet inside the library a different kind of tempest had forever altered the landscape between them, turning what had begun as an arrangement of necessity into something neither could deny, held the possibility of genuine attachment. The discovery of the hidden chamber occurred 3 weeks into their unusual arrangement, after days of methodical investigation, combining Sebastian's knowledge of the house with Evangeline's memory of her father's map. Working together in the East Wing Library, they identified subtle differences between the current architecture and the original plans, revealing a section of wall that measured slightly narrower than it should. Late one evening, with Lady Margaret safely retired, they pressed and prodded at the wood panelling until Sebastian discovered a concealed mechanism behind a particular volume of family history, causing a section of shelving to swing outward with the reluctant groan of long unused hinges. The narrow passage beyond led them down a winding stone staircase, lit by the candles they carried, the dancing flames revealing centuries of dust undisturbed until their descent. At the bottom they found not a vault filled with gold as Evangeline had once imagined, but a small chamber containing a single iron box sealed with the Blackwood crest. Inside lay the document Sebastian had sought for years, his grandfather's signed orders from the Prince Regent himself, authorizing his apparent treasonous activities as part of a complex counterintelligence operation. The evidence that would restore his family's honor had been hidden away for safekeeping, then lost in the chaos following the old Duke's sudden death, waiting decades for rediscovery. Their shared triumph manifested in a moment of unexpected physical connection, Sebastian lifting Evangeline in a spontaneous embrace that set her heart racing before propriety reasserted itself, and he gently set her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. In the soft candlelight of the hidden chamber, surrounded by the weight of history and shared purpose, Sebastian regarded her with an expression of such vulnerability that Evangeline felt her breath catch. He confessed in a low voice that while he had begun their arrangement hoping for a practical partnership with a woman of intelligence who might understand his quest, he found himself wanting far more than mere cooperation or even respect. His feelings had evolved beyond his careful plans, becoming something he had neither anticipated nor sought, yet could no longer deny. Evangeline felt her own heart respond to his admission, even as caution and lingering hurt from his earlier revelations held her back. How could she trust that this newfound affection wasn't still part of his plan? She asked softly. Another calculated move in the complex game that had brought them together through manipulation and necessity rather than genuine choice. Her question hung in the air between them, creating new tension where celebration had reigned moments before. The precious document in Sebastian's hands, now overshadowed by the more immediate question of whether two people brought together through such unorthodox circumstances could forge something genuine from foundations built on secrets and finesse. Strategic maneuvering, the transformation of Blackwood Manor from brooding Gothic fortress to glittering social epicenter, seemed nothing short of miraculous as carriages from across the county and beyond delivered the cream of London society to the grandest ball, held at the estate in living memory. Crystal chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles, fresh flowers adorned every surface, and musicians played from a raised dais, while liveried footmen circulated with champagne and delicacies prepared by a French chef, imported specifically for the occasion. At the center of this spectacular renaissance stood Sebastian Montgomery, Duke of Blackwood, resplendent in formal black evening attire that emphasized his commanding height and broad shoulders, the scarred side of his face no longer concealed by shadow, but worn with the confidence of a man who had made peace with his past. Beside him, Evangeline shimmered in a gown of silver tissue over pale blue silk, her chestnut hair arranged with diamond pins that caught the light with every movement, transforming the once overlooked spinster into a woman of undeniable elegance and poise. During dinner, Sebastian rose to address his guests, his deep voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom, as he not only announced the official date of their upcoming wedding, but spoke with unexpected emotion of Evangeline's intelligence, courage, and the profound joy she had brought into his life during their unconventional courtship. The society matrons who had once dismissed Evangeline as an unremarkable wallflower now flocked around her, offering effusive congratulations and invitations to exclusive gatherings, their former condescension replaced by eager cultivation of the future Duchess of Blackwood. Among the guests, Evangeline spotted her father, surprisingly well-dressed and flush with funds, who confided during a brief moment alone that Sebastian had secretly paid all their debts weeks earlier. Regardless of her decision about the marriage, an act of generosity he had kept hidden to avoid influencing her choice. The revelation sent a wave of warmth through her chest, further evidence of the true character of the man she had come to admire beyond all expectation. The evening's only discord arose when Lord Westley, who had once pointedly ignored Evangeline's existence at countless London balls, approached her with wine emboldening his tongue, suggesting loudly that she had compromised herself deliberately to secure the wealthiest husband in England. Sebastian materialized at her side with dangerous speed, his expression hardening as he demanded satisfaction for the insult in terms that brought the surrounding conversations to a startled halt. Before the confrontation could escalate further, Evangeline placed a restraining hand on Sebastian's arm and addressed Lord Westley with glacial composure, observing that a gentleman who had previously found her so thoroughly invisible should hardly concern himself with her affairs now, unless perhaps his sudden interest stemmed from the discovery that he had overlooked a woman of substance while pursuing empty-headed debutantes with larger dowries but smaller minds. The precision of her response, delivered with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her own worth, silenced Lord Westley more effectively than any challenge to duel, sending him retreating into the crowd, while nearby listeners exchanged glances of appreciative surprise at this transformation of the formerly reserved Miss Crawford into a woman capable of defending both her honor and that of the man who had recognized her value when others had not. The month of their unusual arrangement reached its conclusion on a night when moonlight silvered the formal gardens of Blackwood Manor, transforming the carefully tended paths and ancient topiaries into a dreamscape of shadow and light. Evangeline found Sebastian standing beside the stone fountain at the garden centre, his tall figure motionless as he gazed into the rippling water that caught and fragmented the moon's reflection into thousands of glittering pieces. Her approach was silent across the grass, yet he seemed to sense her presence, turning to face her with an expression carefully composed, though his eyes revealed the tension he sought to conceal. Evangeline paused several steps away, the midnight air carrying the scent of roses and the distant sounds of nightingales, as she stated simply that the month was over and he had fulfilled his promise, their arrangement now complete. Sebastian stood perfectly still for a moment before inclining his head in acknowledgement, his voice steady as he confirmed that, as agreed, she was free to go with all debts forgiven regardless of her decision. Though his words remained controlled, Evangeline noted the slight tension in his shoulders, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw as he prepared himself for what he clearly expected to be rejection. The moonlit garden fell silent around them, heavy with unspoken emotions that had grown during their extraordinary month together, feelings neither had anticipated when their unusual courtship began through midnight intrigue and financial necessity. Sebastian turned slightly away, offering her the courtesy of a dignified parting, when Evangeline took a step closer and clarified that she hadn't said she was leaving, only that their arrangement was complete. What happened now would be their choice rather than their obligation, words that caused Sebastian to turn back toward her with cautious hope transforming his austere features. The night air seemed to vibrate between them with possibility, as Evangeline continued softly that she had come to Blackwood Manor seeking treasure, but had found something far more valuable than gold or jewels, a man whose intelligence matched her own, whose courage was demonstrated not in battlefield glory but in daily kindness, whose scars reflected not monstrous character but profound compassion. Sebastian moved toward her then, moonlight illuminating the wonder in his expression, as Evangeline acknowledged that what had begun as necessity had transformed into something neither had sought yet both now desired. A partnership founded on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than mere convenience or obligation. As Sebastian reached for her hands, Evangeline felt the garden around them fade into insignificance compared to the intensity of connection between them, the culmination of a journey that had begun with her desperate midnight venture into his bedchamber and led to this moment of free and honest choice between two people who had discovered in each other qualities society had overlooked, misunderstood in them both. Sebastian moved with deliberate grace to kneel before Evangeline in the moonlit garden, the imposing Duke of Blackwood setting aside his title and power to present himself simply as a man in love. The transformation was remarkable, his usual commanding presence giving way to genuine vulnerability as he looked up at her with eyes that held no calculation or strategy, only unguarded emotion that caught the moonlight like the water in the fountain behind them. He spoke softly yet with profound sincerity, reminding her that he had once locked a door and demanded marriage through circumstance and necessity, but now he wished to open every door between them and ask instead for her heart freely given. His hands, strong and steady in all their previous encounters, trembled slightly as they held hers. His voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent years behind carefully constructed walls, now willingly dismantled for the woman before him. In this moment of perfect honesty, Sebastian acknowledged how their unusual beginning had transformed into something neither had anticipated, how the arrangement designed to solve practical problems had revealed possibilities for joy neither had dared imagine in their separate solitudes. Evangeline gazed down at the man kneeling before her, marveling at how far they had both traveled from their first contentious encounter. She no longer the desperate daughter seeking to save her father from ruin, he no longer the cold creditor using debt as leverage. The confidence that now straightened her spine and lifted her chin came not from social position or financial security, but from the profound knowledge of her own worth reflected in the eyes of the man who had truly seen her. With gentle candor that matched his own, she confessed that her heart had been his since he saw her properly, truly saw her when no one else had bothered to look beyond surface judgments and societal expectations. The intellectual connection that had first drawn them together had deepened into something that encompassed mind, spirit, and heart alike, a recognition of kindred souls disguised by circumstance and misunderstanding, until fate, or perhaps their own determination, had revealed what might have remained forever hidden. As Sebastian rose to his feet, the distance between them vanished as she stepped willingly into his embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that sealed promises no formal document could adequately capture. The sacred nature of their connection, built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than mere convenience or obligation, transformed what had begun as potential scandal into something profound and enduring. Around them, the garden continued its nighttime symphony of rustling leaves and distant birdsong, but for Sebastian and Evangeline the world had narrowed to this single perfect moment of connection, the culmination of a journey that had begun with locked doors and midnight confrontations, and led to the opening of their hearts to possibilities neither had dared imagine before finding unexpected treasure in each other. 1 year later, Blackwood Manor bloomed with renewed life, the once neglected gardens now bursting with color and fragrance, while sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows into rooms, no longer shrouded in holland covers and melancholy. The transformation of the estate mirrored the profound change in its master and mistress, whose partnership had brought light and purpose to spaces long abandoned to shadows and whispers. Sebastian had successfully presented the discovered documents to the proper authorities, his grandfather's name officially cleared of treason through royal proclamation, the Blackwood honor restored after decades of undeserved disgrace. Evangeline, now the Duchess of Blackwood, had established a foundation for educating young women of limited means, using a portion of the substantial Blackwood fortune to create opportunities for girls whose intelligence and potential might otherwise be overlooked by society, just as hers had been before Sebastian recognized her true worth. The garden party celebrating their first anniversary had drawn the finest families from across the county and beyond, many of the same guests who had once whispered about the compromised bride and her scarred husband, now admiring the perfect match between the intelligent Lady Blackwood and her devoted Duke. Lady Pembroke commented loudly to anyone within earshot that one could practically see the connection between them, like two rare volumes from the same collection, finally placed side by side after years of separation. Lord and Lady Harrington observed with approval how Sebastian consulted his wife on matters that most husbands would consider beyond feminine understanding, while Thomas, now engaged himself to a lively young woman of good family, smiled knowingly at the genuine affection evident in every glance the couple exchanged. As Sebastian and Evangeline stood together greeting their guests beneath a rose-covered arbor, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back in a gesture of quiet possession. He leaned closer to whisper in her ear, his voice carrying the playful intimacy they had discovered during their year of marriage. "Aren't you glad you got caught in my bedchamber that night, Duchess?" he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. To which Evangeline replied with the confident smile of a woman secure in both her position and her husband's affection, "I wasn't caught, Your Grace. I was finally found." Their shared laughter drew curious glances from nearby guests, none of whom could possibly understand the private significance of the exchange, how a moment that had seemed catastrophic at the time had ultimately opened the door to profound happiness neither had believed possible. For sometimes what appears to be a moment of scandal or desperation proves instead to be the unexpected pathway to discovering where we truly belong, with the person who sees beyond our carefully constructed facades to the authentic self beneath, recognizing value and possibility where others perceive only limitations and flaws, transforming what begins as necessity into something freely chosen and infinitely precious.